In this video, I'm going to create a script and assign it to an object to make so that it will move and look for a target that's in the scene. So this could be useful to generate some NPCs or enemies that are targeting the player and are trying to get close to it. So I have this character here in the scene, Liam, and if I press play, I will be able to move around. And I want to create this script, which I have already made, which is here in the scripts. And I created it as a follow. I call it follow. And as usual, in typical Unity fashion, I created a new component that then I'm going to attach to the object that's going to move. So in this case, for example, I want to apply to this prefab here, this girl, Kira B. So Kira here has no movement component of any sort. And to assign the script, I will just drag and drop the follow script onto her. And as you can see, the follow script that I created has a public reference to a target, so to a transform component. And in this case, for example, I want to follow this boy. So I want to assign the Liam game object to the reference on the follow script on the Kira. And notice that as I do that from the game object, because I declared it as a transform, Unity finds automatically the transform. So now this follow script is referencing this transform here, right? And that's what I expect. Let's press play to see the final result, and then we'll comment the script. So as you can see, the transform is basically following the player. Sorry, the girl is following the player. As I move around, she's trying to get closer. So let's comment the script. It's a very simple script. As usual, I try to keep it very simple. I'm doing basically everything in the update. From the beginning, though, you can see that I declared a public reference to a transform called the target, and that's why when we go back to here, we see target property, and it's a transform type. So public means that I will see it in the inspector. I assign that, the target, and then here in the update, I can do my calculations. And basically what I'm doing here is a very simple operation. I'm calculating, I called it direction here. It's basically a vector 3 that points in the direction of the target. And I do that with very simple vector 3 math. I take the position of the target, in this case is the boy, and I subtract the starting position, so the current position of, in this case, the girl. And that gives me a vector 3 that points from here to here. And I store it in this variable called direction. From that, I have a simple if. This is just an addition. It's not necessary, but this is nice because what this does is that I only do the movement part if the square magnitude, so the length of this direction vector, is above 1. So this means that only if the two objects are separated by 1 unit or more, I'm going to move it, which means that the object, the girl, is going to stop 1 unit away from the target. This is nice to avoid the objects from overlapping each other. And then I do the actual movement. So I use a translate function as usual. Like we saw in the other video about the movement script. Translate function moves the transform of this object, again, the girl. In which position I use the direction. Normalized means that I'm going to take the vector, whatever length it is, and I'm going to normalize it. I'm going to put it to like length 1. Normalize is used because this allows us to make the movement independent of the distance that separates the two objects. So regardless of whether the object is very far or very close, because this vector will be a different value, I take the normalized version, which means vector of length 1. Then I multiply it by time delta time, which is the typical value that I would use to make sure that this script runs at the same kind of like speed, so that the object moves at the same speed regardless of which computer is running it. So this is just a very typical thing to do in Unity, and this value is usually very low, so this makes the whole vector very small. And then I'm going to use the space word as usual. So I'm going to do this whole operation in the word space, which is basically these axes that you see here. So X is going to be here and Z is going to be here. That's fine. Sorry, I want to collapse this one. So back to the script. And then finally, after I move the object, I will also orient the object towards the direction that I'm walking in so that the object basically rotates. So I'm going to say that the forward of this object, which is basically this blue arrow, points in the direction where I'm moving. And let's try the script again. So as you can see, I can move around and the girl will follow the playing character, trying to get to its position. There's no animation, of course, but we can do that separately. And then once it gets to 1 unit of distance, it will stop. So if I resume walking, she will start following again, and then she will stop again. Now, the only thing left to tackle, which I think is worth mentioning, is that if this character was being spawned at runtime, we couldn't have this reference. So this reference that you see here on the follow script is a reference from this object here to this object here, and that's fine because they're both in the scene. But if I were to, let's say that I apply this script to her, you can already see it because the property is in bold. And then I remove this object from the scene and I go and check the prefab. I open the prefab and you can see that the target is none. So this prefab is not pointing to the playing character for one very simple reason, because in Unity, this is a very generic rule of Unity. Assets cannot have a reference to something that's contained in a scene. They can only reference other assets. So in this case, we need to fetch that reference at runtime. So as soon as this character is spawned, we want to fetch the reference. And I'm going to show you why, because if I were to enable the spawner that I created in the other lesson and connect this prefab to the spawner, now if I press play, Unity is going to spawn that character here randomly. As you can see, it's now spitting out errors, and it says that there's an unassigned reference exception. The variable target of follow has not been assigned. So if I select any of the spawned clones, you can see that the target variable on follow has no value. And that's why we're getting this error. We're trying to make a calculation on a transform that we haven't found. So how do we get that value? It's quite simple. I've already prepared it in the script. Rather than relying on the fact that this variable is public, so somebody must assign it from the inspector, we will fetch the value here in the start. So if I uncomment this line, what I'm doing here is, again, instead of relying on the inspector assignment, we get the value, so equals, and we use this peculiar function. It's called find with tag. So if we go back to Unity for a second and I select the playing character, here at the top you have the tags. Tags are a function that allows us to basically assign a tag to any game object, and then we can find that game object, or we can filter game objects by tag. In this case, I want to tag the Liam game object as the player. So this is saying that this game object has been tagged as the player, which doesn't mean anything on its own, but in our script, we're going to filter by tag. So we find with tag, we're asking Unity to find any object that has the tag player. In this case, there's only going to be one. We grab the transform of that object and we save it into the target property. So now on start, as soon as the game is as soon as the prefab is instantiated, it's going to find its target on its own automatically. So I save that script and I press play. And as you can see now, as soon as the instances of Kira are spawned, they will start following the target as we would expect. So if I select any of the instances, you will see that they point to the correct the correct instance in the scene. That's how you create basically a dynamic reference that is resolved at runtime when the game is started. And then, the thing that we do in the update is exactly the same.